decks over the course of day one, going 9-0. Can he beat just a pretty straightforward, streamlined Giurato deck? Now, something that's working against Dan in this matchup, he has no copies of Sylvan Caryatid. Really important against mono red, both accelerating to your threats and giving you an early stable blocker. Very important that Dan's on the play, because on the draw, I think the absence of that card would really punish him.
Well, what he does have to start is a Temple of Malady. A little scry action will get his day started as we are underway here from DC in round number 10. A Foundry Denizen is where Giurato will start. Musser with a Thoughtseize on turn number 2. We'll get a look at Seth's hand and see what Dan is going to have to try to beat here moving forward. You see a hand to Stoke the Flames, Hordling Outburst. Not one, but 2 copies of Monastery Swiftspear and a Fire Drinker Satyr, so not a bad hand at all.
Not a bad hand, but a hand that is vulnerable to Courser or Crewfix if Dan selects the Stoke the Flames.
Dan going to record this information, go down to 18 in the process, and we'll see what card he does want to select. A lot of nice options available there. Quick start here for Seth, though.
Yeah, this is a very good opening hand, but this is something where, Dan has some play here if he has a Courser Crewfix in his hand. If Seth was on the play, I think Dan would be very hard-pressed to win this game, even if he had Courser on turn 3. As it stands, he's got a good shot if he can hit a Courser.
Temple Malady, number 2. We'll put the top card to the bottom. We are going to head back Giurato's way. Did take the Stoke the Flames with the Thoughtseize, so that is notable.
Yeah, it could be a concession to the fact that, well, he can't really take a creature in a meaningful way because there's just too many creatures in the hand.
Couple copies of Monastery Swiftspear here will trigger the Denizen twice, so this will be an attack here for 5 points of damage. How do you feel about leading out with those 2 haste creatures as opposed to maybe play a Fire Drinker Satyr there?
So I think what Seth is trying to do here is set himself up where if Dan has Courser or Crewfix, which you see this turn, he can play the Hordling Outburst and have really good attacks because he generates 2 2/3s and a 4/1, which can attack profitably into Courser or Crewfix. If he plays the Fire Drinker Satyr, yes, he's better against Bioblight, but Bioblight's going to be good against him anyway this game, and he has a much worse attack against Courser Crewfix, which is the card he's really worried about.
Well, here's a Hordling Outburst, which means 3 goblins are going to happen. Of course, Prowess is going to trigger, so those Swiftspears are going to be 2/3s, as you mentioned, and then the Foundry Denizen, well, 3 red creatures come into play, so that means that's going to be a 4/1. So all these goblins will come in. Now it's time to work into the red zone here, you have to imagine, for Giurato.
He took the risk here that there was no Bioblight in Dan's hand. Not even these decks all play Bioblight in the main deck. It's a pretty reasonable risk. Even still, Dan has 2 copies, but he has 4 copies of Courser or Crewfix. And I think the play that Seth made last turn was much better against Courser.
Time to block for Courser. It's going to go in front of Musser, so this means Musser's going to take 6 points of damage if he blocks this way. And he will. Courser of Crewfix the draw. Top card is a copy of Bioblight. That's a good one if you can get to it.
You can see Seth there make a little motion with his hands like, okay.
Yep. Now Musser without a land to play, though, and that's a big deal, as if Musser could go up to 9 here after that second Courser, that would certainly be helpful. You see the top card of his deck is a Bioblight. We'll see if Musser gets to make it there. Seth does not want this game to go much longer. You know that much, because Courser can run away with it.
Absolutely.
And Giurato does have a copy of Fire Drinker Satyr in his hand. We know that much.
We know one of his draw steps was a Mountain because he didn't have Mountain number 3 in his hand when he got Thoughtseize either.
Yep. And he's reaching. He's going to play a whole bunch of 1-drops.
Unleash the idiots.
Pretty much. His hand is empty, and he's going to send them all sideways. I like it.
Well, I don't know how much a Foundry Denizen or a Fire Drinker Satyr in your hand is worth, so here we are.
Every card that he has drawn is on the table. Musser's going to have to figure out the best way to block here now. And of course, with Bioblight being the draw step, it kind of informs his decision on how he wants to go about blocking.
So in an ideal world, how he would block was getting the 2 Swiftspears off the table, untapping and Bioblighting, but he can't afford the hit from the Foundry Denizen. He has to block it.
It would be lethal if he took it. So that's going to trade with the Courser. Swiftspear's going to bite the dust. Musser's going to go down to 3. He's going to have to find a lander off the top of his deck. That's a copy of Read the Bones.
Perfect.
Yes. No.
So even Bioblight here means that Dan cannot block out of this. He can Bioblight the Fire Drinker Satyr, and there's 4 attackers coming through, each with 1 power against 1 blocker with Dan at 3.
Yep.
Oh, excuse me, there's a Monastery Swiftspear off camera.
Yep.
So he's got more than that covered.
Seth's going to do a little bit of math here and make sure that nothing goes too wrong.
I advise attacking. If you drew a creature before combat, I like casting it.
Everybody's coming into the red zone. And Dan Musser's going to pick up those 3 lands in his courser and go home. Seth Giurato is going to win game number 1 here over Dan Musser. Mono red aggro up a game over Obzon midrange, but I imagine some things are going to change as we take a look at Dan Musser's sideboard.
He has a 3rd copy of Bioblight, a Murderous Cut, an Unravel the Aether, an Under End, Tassiger the Golden Fang, and a Ajani Mentor of Heroes, a Liliana Vest, 3 copies of Drown in Sorrow, 3 Glare of Heresy, 2 Read the Bones. So I really like the 3 copies of Drown in Sorrow and the additional Bioblight. I think Murderous Cut, maybe not the most efficient thing in the world, but still good enough to bring in. I actually like the 2nd copy of Tassiger as well. I think it's a pretty good payoff for him as far as a delve spell goes, because it's just so big and it can come online pretty fast. Dan's got a variety of pretty slow cards in this deck. He's got a copy of Ugin, 3 copies of Elspeth, 2 copies of Sorin, 2 copies of End Hostilities and Utter End. So I think there's some room to bring in the 2nd copy of Tassiger.
On Seth's side, I don't expect a lot to change in his favor here. He does have 4 Eidolons of the Great Revel, 2 Searing Bloods, 2 Wild Slashes, a Chandra Pyromaster, 3 Sarkin the Dragon Speaker, 2 Arc Lightnings, and a Temple of Malice. He's not going to be bringing in the Haymakers that Dan is bringing in, but what do you like here from the red side?
So I like Eidolon and the Great Revel. Dan's going to be lowering the curve on his deck, and if Eidolon triggers once on each side of the table, let's say, that's a huge victory for Seth, because Dan's life total matters much more to Dan than Seth does to Seth. I think that it's reasonable to bring in the Planeswalkers as well, try to have a different dimension of attack, especially because you're going to be playing against Drown in Sorrow and potentially other sweepers as well. So I think the 1 Chandra and the 3 Sarkins can come in here, and that might mean that Seth's supposed to bring in the Temple of Malice, as I would imagine the Scryland in the sideboard is to help him out when he's bringing in his more expensive spells.
Yeah, when he's bringing up the curve a little bit.
Yeah,
on his
especially
side.
Sarkin. I mean, he's playing 22 lands, which is a little low for some 5-drops, and I feel like if that lands in the sideboard, it's probably for the situations where he's bringing in Sarkin.
All right, well, players are going to shuffle up here as Dan Musser took a beat down there, game number 1. He's getting ready. Seth doing the same. While we do wait, we will talk about SCG Game Night every single week and any day that you want to run it. We've got Mammoth tokens and pins for just a little bit longer.
Absolutely. This is the January kit. If you sign up for SCG Game Night, every week we'll send you a new kit with these pins and foils with a different piece of art for each month. This is the January kit. A little too late to get signed up for February, but if you want to get signed up for March, head over to starcitygames.com/game night or contact your Star City Games organized play representative.
We'll be unveiling February and what we have for Game Night next week, actually. We're in Indianapolis as we'll bridge the gap. Saturday will be the 31st of January, and then Sunday will be the 1st of February.
Yep.
Boom. And we'll be able to let you guys know what February's tokens and pins will look like. But if you do want to get signed up, as Patrick did mention, starcitygames.com/game night for more information. Perhaps you'd like to play a mono red aggro or Obzon midrange deck at your local game night. Both of these decks 9-0, leading the pack here in DC among the 507 players that did come to do battle in our very large open, the first one with Fate Reforged.
And Seth's build of mono red, not quite as budget as Drew Levin's, as he has some Sarkins in the sideboard, but still, if you're looking for a cheap option to enter standard, mono red aggro is not a bad place to be.
It looks like just a pretty good deck, honestly. You know, we didn't see a lot of it during Konzatar Kier standard, and then it really fell off the map, and then people didn't even prepare to beat it at that point. And I think that that's kind of the reason we see Seth here at 9-0 is that I don't think a lot of players prepared to beat this sort of strategy this weekend.
And there really isn't that much new content in the deck. There's a couple of copies of Wild Slash, which is fine, but nothing too exciting. I think Mardu Scout's a big addition. Yeah. I think that card's quite powerful, but definitely not the splashiest card to be revealed in Fate Reforged. But I think a lot of this has to do with capitalizing on the fact that people are unprepared in a general sense for very aggressive monocolor decks week 1, assuming they're not on the radar going in. We've had points in the standard metagame where main deck Drown in Sorrow and main deck Anger of the Gods has been a thing, as Konzatar Kier has been legal. But we've gotten away from that as the format has become more and more Whip of Erebos centric, more and more about trying to out mid-range your opponent. And if that's the metagame people are anticipating coming in, that can be a really good time to play mono red because you get so much advantage out of your game 1 matchups.
Musser going to very quickly take a mulligan, so he'll be looking at 6 cards here momentarily. If you guys have not had the opportunity to head over to the coverage page here for SCGDC, be sure to do that, as we've had a lot of awesome deck techs, and we'll have more coming for you as well. We've seen a lot of innovative decks. Ali Antrazi with his Sultai ramp deck. We've seen some Teamer Ascendancy brew as well from Joey Page.
The Teamer deck, the Teamer Ascendancy combo deck was definitely the craziest thing we saw yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we saw a lot of sweet decks, a lot of cool stuff going on, a lot of Ugins being cast, but that Teamer Ascendancy deck was, if you had given me a long time at the card pool and said, figure out how you go off with Teamer Ascendancy, I'm not sure I could have figured it out.
I don't think so either. So if you guys have not seen that, be prepared for that at the conclusion of this round. As Joey Page is having a nice tournament with that deck. Actually beat Brad Nelson in a feature match.
Yeah, and that's what's so cool about Magic, among other things, is I've built some reasonably successful decks over in my day and have a pretty good handle of certain things. And still I see decks where I think to myself, man, that person's just a genius, whoever came up with this. Yeah. I would have never figured this out.
Yeah, you're doing what?
Yeah. The saber tooth lets you do. So you singing Bell Strike your own guy, and then. Okay, whatever.
Yeah. Hopefully we get the chance to see it again. Musser taking a look at 5 cards now. That's not a face that's happy. Let's make it 4.
Now, this is bad news for Dan. Don't get me wrong, but when you have Corsair Crewfix and you have Drown Sorrow in your deck, you can win on 4 cards. Yeah. I mean, people have mulliganed pretty low against me in this kind of matchup and still won because of how powerful those cards are.
And the power level of the red deck isn't exactly through the roof either.
No, it is not.
It definitely has some draws and some combination of cards that are quite good, but overall, Siege Rhino is better than every card in this red deck.
Yes. Corsair Crewfix is the real, it's fast to get online. It can get your land drop so you can get to your more expensive stuff.
Musser looking at 4 cards. He's going to lead it off with a Temple of Silence. A little scry action here. See if he can find the way to play some magic. He at least has a second land. There's another Temple of Silence there.
And an Abzan Charm. This is an acceptable 4-card hand.
He's going to leave it on top. We're going to go back to Giurato's way. Seth with a Mountain to start. You have to imagine a 1-drop. I suppose he's figuring out which one he wants to play. He's got so many in his deck. That'll be a Fire Drinker Satyr before passing the turn back over to Musser. Musser did keep his card on top, and it's a Sandsep Citadel. So now he's got green mana as he passes the turn back over to Giurato. There is a Mountain, and this is a Monastery Swift Spear, and there is another one. So an attack for 4. Put it in test right away, but if Musser somehow has like a Drowning Sorrow, even though it doesn't look like he does, he'd be doing okay as there's a Temple of Silence. Take a look at the top card. Looks like it's going to very quickly become the bottom one.
Bioblight does a lot of work in this scenario, too.
For sure.
This is not an impossible game for Dan to win.
But nothing just yet here for Musser. Mountain there. Rabble Master here.
This is a very powerful start for Seth, but he is throwing caution to the wind as it relates to Drown in Sorrow. If it comes off of Dan's deck, unless Seth has a really good follow-up, we got a game on our hands.
Yep. Musser will draw. All he can do is pass the turn back. No Drown in Sorrow just yet. He's at 11. Giurato will draw. Active Rabble Master, Fire Drinker Satyr, 2 Monastery Swift Spears, a Goblin token out there. Maybe another Goblin token on the way. And he'll take a moment here. He's in a very favorable position, but this is one you don't want to screw up.
No. The coast is clear on Drown in Sorrow. So now you're worried about what if he has Bioblight? What if there's a removal spell for my Rabble Master? But if you aren't generating lethal this turn, you're loath to add any more to the board, because then if Dan draws a Drown in Sorrow, it gets really bad for you.
Yep.
But if you add nothing to the board, and Dan has a removal spell for your Rabble Master, let's say, and you just pump the Fire Drinker Satyr and pass the turn, well, now do you have the tools to be a Siege Rhino? You don't have a lot in play, and you certainly can't kill it.
There's a Goblin token from the Rabble Master. Much with Abzan Charm in hand. Looks like a Stoke the Flame is going to be cast to go upstairs. And it looks like Musser is waiting for our Master to come in so he can Abzan Charm that. That gives him the best chance, but those Swift Spears are also pretty big.
Yeah, this is lethal through 1 removal spell on the Rabble Master.
Yeah.
The Swiss Spears go up to 2 power, and that's 7 even if he can kill the Rabble Master.
That's going to do it. Seth Giurato going to win this match here over Dan Musser, 2-0. Mono red aggro will take care of Obzon mid-range. And Mr. Giurato is on top of the standings, 10-0 here this morning in DC.
Very impressive and definitely a different take on mono red than we've seen over the last couple months. The versions that we have seen have been more boss sly, 17, 18 land sort of joints, and Seth has 22 lands in his deck. He's going up to 4 mana spells in his main deck with a couple copies of Chandra and Sunny into Sarkin even. So it's much more of a traditional mono red deck than the extreme hyper aggressive low end decks that we've seen over the last couple months.